Hello everybody and welcome back to another guide. This time I want to show you guys my setup for Poppy support, which is extremely underrated and almost never picked, but I've been playing a lot of it lately and it is surprisingly effective. Basically, the runes for Poppy support are very straightforward. It's the exact same runes that you would use for like an Alistar support, except you switch out the flat armor reds for AD reds, because, well, Poppy's kind of an aggressive support. If you can get a wall slam on someone in lane and you don't have AD reds, your follow-up damage is not going to be, it's just not going to be as good. You have AD scalings on your E, you have an AD scaling on your Q, and you will be using your auto attacks a lot when you trade and stuff like that. So overall, AD Reds is the best for, even though you're supporting, it's still the best for Poppy. Everyone should be able to afford these runes, so there's pretty much no reason not to use them. If you can afford health seals, they are the best, especially in combination with armor quints. And then we just have flat magic resist. All of our defensive stats, well, all of our stats here on the rune page, it's all flat stuff. None of it is scaling, because when you make a rune page for support, you have to keep in mind that supports are, it's literally the role in the game that scales the slowest in terms of leveling. So it's not very smart to get scaling runes. It's better to get flat runes. And if you don't get flat runes, well, all of the brawling and the trading you're going to be doing in lane, which there's going to be a lot of that in the bot lane, in solo queue, there always is. Well, not always, but almost always. Well, you're just gonna get wrecked, because the other support and the other AD carry will have flat stats for the early game, and you just can't win your trades without them. So that's why we go flat magic resist, flat armor, and flat health. If you cannot afford this rune page, maybe you can't afford the health seals, which I believe are quite expensive, if I recall. If you can't afford it, that's fine. You're just going to have to go with kind of a budget version where, I mean, if I couldn't afford it, what I would do is I would go flat armor seals, and then I would either stick with the armor quints or I would have flat AD quints. Sticking with the armor quints is probably not as good an idea as just using AD quints, just because when you're stacking a lot of armor on top of itself, it's not as effective as a defensive stat as when you combine it with health, especially not in the early game. Health is literally the best defensive stat in the game in the early and mid game, so you don't want to be stacking the crap out of armor, at least not yet. Having said that, that is what you're going to do later on, because, well, Poppy has her percentage bonus armor and magic resist passive on her W, so stacking resists is worth it on Poppy. Just, this is the combination of resists and health is what you really want, at least in the beginning of the game. So that's the rune page. That's the best rune page. As far as the masteries go, there's a bunch of different stuff that you can do. This one looks a little weird for support because it has Grasp of the Undying. Most people would rather have Thunderlords on a support if they want to deal damage, or if they don't want to deal damage, they would have Bond of Stone. Personally, I like Grasp of the Undying as my keystone, even though it's support on Poppy. Firstly, because when you finally are in combat as Poppy, you are gap closing on people and you're crowd controlling them, and you're damaging them continuously. In other words, it's very, very easy for you to be in combat for 4 seconds and get your Grasp of the Undying proc off. Secondly, I've played a lot with this mastery, and it just turns out to be the case that the extra damage and the heal from this mastery, for some reason, it just always saves my ass and gets me a kill. So I just don't see a reason why I would switch out this mastery. It's really, really good. Even though Poppy support is not very common in general, the most common keystone, when you finally do see Poppy support, you'll mostly see Bond of Stone. Personally, I don't really like Bond of Stone, but if you don't mind the mastery, if you think it's great, by all means, go ahead and use it. I just like Grasp of the Undying better, personally. I also like the tiny bit of extra sustain that it gives you, just because that sustain goes along as a health value, it goes along well with the resists that you'll be stacking. So going into the individual masteries, recovery versus unyielding. If you're getting harassed a lot in lane and you don't feel like you can live without recovery, go ahead and use the mastery. Personally, I've never needed it, and so I've just always felt like the late game mastery here is worth it. But unyielding, more or less, is just like a small extra boost to your passive W, basically. That's the way you can choose to look at it. Use recovery if you need to, if you don't do what I do, and use unyielding. Explorer versus tough skin is personal preference. I like not dying in lane, so I choose tough skin. Runic armor is pretty much a no-brainer just because your AD carry will always have heal for you, so it's just a really good mastery to have. Especially when the alternative is only 50 flat HP on Veteran Scars. It's not that big a deal. 50 flat HP, I mean, it is really good in the early game, but Runic armor is so much better in the late game that I just always pick this one. Also, having reduced summoner cooldown is insanely good on Poppy, because a lot of the time, when you try to wall slam people, the angle is just slightly off, and you're going to need to flash for it, so that you can get the angle and the stun off with your E. And, of course, Insight helps with that. Legendary Guardian. This is really good in the bottom lane, because, well, first of all, it's pretty decent because it scales off of your W passive and unyielding, so there's that. And of course, it's great for team fighting because the armor and magic resist increases per enemy champion. But the real reason why this is so important in the bottom lane is because you will almost always be in a situation where you have two opponents rather than one, just, when you're in lane. So you don't just get 3 armor and magic resist in lane permanently, you get 6 instead. And of course, if the enemy jungler comes around, well, you get even more defense. So I find that Legendary Guardian for Poppy, but also just for supports in general, is really good. As far as the rest of your points go, you can put 12 into Cunning if you really want Dangerous Game or Bandit. But I find that Exposed Weakness and the extra damage you get in Ferocity, just in general, is slightly better. It's not a must. You can go Cunning, like I said, but I like Ferocity better. We choose Sorcery. I mean, between Sorcery and Fury on Poppy support, it's not going to be noticeable whichever one you pick. Like 2% increased ability damage is not that much. The extra attack speed is not going to be noticeable. But I mean, Sorcery is better, but they both suck, let's be honest. Exposed Weakness is amazing. This is like the whole reason why we're in this tree is because Exposed Weakness is so fucking good. When you have this on a support and you damage the person that tries to kill your AD carry, it increases the damage your AD carry does to that person. The truly great thing about this mastery is that it's kind of like you're giving your AD carry a free sorcery skill. Except instead of 2% increased ability damage, it's 3%, and on top of that, it's not just your AD carry's abilities, it's the auto attacks, it's everything. Every piece of damage your AD carry is going to be dealing is amplified now because of Exposed Weakness. Not only that, it doesn't stop there, not only that, it also works with the rest of your entire team. So the more people are peeling for your AD carry, the better this mastery is. And of course, this mastery is extremely versatile because if you're engaging as Poppy support, then as soon as your teammates follow up on your engage, then the damage amplification works there as well. So there's just no downside to this mastery. Natural talent, I just pick over Vampirism simply because Poppy has both AD and AP scalings. Granted, the AP scaling on her W is pretty terrible. I still feel like it's better than Vampirism, just because it's more damage. Why wouldn't you want to kill people more? I mean, they're both pretty bad. It's kind of like between Fury and Sorcery. Like, Vampirism and Natural Talent are both really, really bad masteries, but you gotta pick one of them, and I think Natural Talent is the better one. Oppressor, because you're Poppy, so you will have at least a decent amount of CC. So, and of course, there's no reason to pick Bounty Hunter since you're supporting. So those are the runes and masteries that I use personally for Poppy support. If I was to go into Cunning instead of Ferocity, it would look probably like this. I would either have Bandit if I value the gold, or I would have Dangerous Game if I value the survivability you get from Dangerous Game. Merciless is kind of like a shitty version of Sorcery and Oppressor. It makes you deal more damage, just like those two masteries, percentage extra damage, but it's only when people are below 40% health. So it's not vital, you don't need this mastery. Secret Stash, I would go because Assassin is worthless, and same with Runic Affinity, and of course you're not CSing, so there's no reason not to go Wanderer up here. This is what you can do. If you really want to, like I said earlier, you can also switch your Grasp of the Undying and Legendary Guardian points. You can switch them for Thunderlords, where you run Hybrid Pen, just for extra damage. If you don't care about the Hybrid Pen, I guess you could go more CDR, because you will be rotating your spells over and over again in team fights, so cooldown reduction is good on Poppy support. So those are your alternative options. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different stuff that you can do as far as Poppy support setup goes, but like I said, I've played her a lot recently, and I just find that this is the best setup. I have played with 12 and Cunning before, and I have played with Thunderlord's Decree, and it just doesn't feel as good. I think this is the best setup, so if you want to try out Poppy support in your games, I recommend that you start off with this, and if you run into any problems, you can switch some of them out. Just be smart about what you do, and you'll be fine. So thanks for watching, and if you want to check out the items that I use for Poppy support, then you can click this video right here.